The Lavender Scare was a turning point in history in which rising rates of fear, anxiety, and mistrust regarding communism during the Cold War led some members of society to make false connections between communist political ideologies and homosexuality. Homosexuality was linked with communism due to beliefs that both groups were subcultures that had their own literature, cultural codes, and bonds of loyalty. Shortly after, homosexuals were high suspects of communism. While it is difficult to pinpoint a specific timeline, the following events that are discussed contributed to the period known as the Lavender Scare. During the Cold War, soldiers were being released and returning from their military assignments. As more soldiers returned, they began the process of looking for work in cities. As a result, communities saw a significant increase in male population. While public awareness around homosexual relationships increased, it soon became relatively common to see homosexual relationships. Public support for homosexual relationships, however, did not increase. As homosexuality and communism continued to become linked, the fear of both grew. This phenomenon is called McCarthyism after Joseph McCarthy, a U.S. senator who declared that he had a list of 205 communists working in the Department of State. He believed that he needed to fire these employees in order to try to exterminate communism in America. As a result, Americans started accusing each other of being homosexuals, which was also an accusation of being a communist. This only encouraged the fear. Due to these accusations, people became dedicated to not associating themselves with homosexuality. It also resulted in thousands of homosexuals losing their jobs. While there were noticeable effects of the Lavender Scare in 1950, the real terror didn't start until 1953 when the U.S. government began discriminating against homosexuals. On April 27, 1953, President Eisenhower created Executive Order 10450, which stated that homosexuals were perverts, criminals, mentally ill, and must be blocked from federal employment. This order enabled government officials the right to question employees' sexual identities and search for gays and lesbians. If it was determined that an employee was homosexual, they were terminated. As a result, almost 5,000 federal employees were fired. Joseph McCarthy was finally removed from Congress in April 1954. Prior to his removal from office, many of McCarthy's supporters started to fade once they heard of the military allegations. These allegations made claims that McCarthy gave special treatment to one of his former staff who was accused of being homosexual. His supporters then began to question his mission. Correspondingly, people requested an investigation on McCarthy. They demanded that the hearings be broadcasted nationally on television.
We know he belonged to the Lawyers Guild, and Mr. Cole nods his head at me. I did you, I think, no personal injury, Mr. Cole.
No, sir.
I meant to do you no personal injury. And if I did, I beg your pardon. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Weakening support and public knowledge ultimately led to McCarthy's downfall and his removal from office. McCarthy died in 1957 at the age of 48 due to cirrhosis. Although McCarthy's reign had ended, there would be many more terrorizing events for the LGBTQ community in the coming years. The Stonewall Rebellion, however, was a prominent point in U.S. history. The Stonewall Rebellion took place at the Stonewall Inn, a gay bar in New York. On June 28, 1969, police invaded the bar and arrested 14 citizens and injured several others. News of this incident spread across the country. This would soon become a dominant platform for the LGBTQ community to stand up for their rights. This incident is known as the Stonewall Riot, but is not called this in regards to the LGBTQ community because the term riot is what authorities use to try to justify their actions. The outcome of this attention to the crisis was the beginning of the gay rights movement, and on the anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion, the Christopher Street Liberation Day March was the first gay march in America. With over 2,000 participants, gays, lesbians, and visitors marched from Greenwich Village to Central Park. This march attracted national attention, and soon there was a sister march in Los Angeles. This march also changed public opinion on homosexuality. The first major organization to surface in support of gay rights was the Mattachine Society that was created in 1950, just before the Lavender Scare had started. The Mattachine Society was an LGBTQ social group where its members could discuss shared hardships. Members also worked to stop imprisonment of homosexuals and give legal advice to those who had been imprisoned. Its founders were Harry Hay, Dale Jennings, and Rudy Gernrich. Ironically, the group was based around a communist-like government. As a result of the group being set up like this, new members disapproved and soon the founders were expelled and replaced. Harry Hay was kicked out of the group in 1953 for being too conservative, as well as its other founders. As a result, he became a less prominent figure until the 1970s when there was more radical activism. In this interview, Harry Hay describes what the hardships were like for homosexuals in the 1950s.
And it was in the Webster, in the American dictionary, it wasn't there till about 1954. And then only as an adjective, not as a noun. As an adjective, and you have to recognize that what is being talked about this time is there are heterosexuals who have gone perverted. There are heterosexuals who become degenerate. And they perform these nasty acts on Saturday nights behind the bushes in the park. And that's a homosexual act, and it's illegal. And if you got caught the first time, you get 6 months in the county jail. If you got caught the second time, you get sent to Atascadero, which was the state prison. And in the state prison, you were offered a choice, two choices of cure. One is castration, and the other one's lobotomy. And don't think we don't know thousands of guys who went that road. We did in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
As a result of these organizations being created, more associations and groups started to sprout. Another one of these associations was the One magazine. The magazine was actually created by members of the Mattachine Society. The authors used pen names to protect their identities. The One was infamous for book reviews, letters to editors, news, opinion pieces, fiction, and discussing controversial topics of the times like gay marriage. The pressure, discrimination, fear, and uncertainty around homosexuality continued to mount. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association, or APA for short, added homosexuality to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders and labeled it as a sociopathic personality disturbance. They claimed that homosexual behaviors should be classified under the same category of mental illness disorders like pedophilia, fetishism, and sexual sadism like rape, sexual assault, and mutilation. Soon, protests emerged to support removing homosexuality from the DSM. These protests were led not only by a growing population of gay and lesbian rights organizations, but emerging civil rights and women's rights organizations as well. The protests created such a commotion that at the next APA meeting, there was a panel discussion called Gay is Good that allowed gay activists to speak on what they were dealing with and what they experienced. The following year, activist Dr. Anonymous, a homosexual psychiatrist who hid his identity in fear of persecution, argued that psychiatry was prejudiced against homosexual people. After nearly 13 years, the DSM removed homosexuality, noting that homosexuality did not meet the criteria for a mental health condition. This was a massive milestone for the LGBTQ+ community because it validated that there was nothing wrong with homosexuality. As further validation, in 2019, the Love Act was passed. The Love Act offers a full apology from Congress for allowing harmful policies during the Lavender Scare to all employees that were terminated. The Department of State has reviewed all employee terminations since January 1st, 1950, and looked at cases that regarded anything related to homosexuality. They then decided whether or not an employee was wrongly terminated. If they were, the department issued an apology. The Lavender Scare also influenced the discussion of same-sex marriage. Homosexuality was seen as a bad thing, and these perspectives are still seen today. Baker v. Nelson was the first court case regarding same-sex marriage. Richard John Baker wanted to marry his fiancée, James Michael McConnell, but the law prevented it. He went to law school at the University of Minnesota to try to find a loophole, but it failed. He changed his name in order to get married. Things finally changed in 1996 during the Romer v. Evans case. This case revolved around a law passed in Colorado banning anti-discrimination laws. The law made it clear to the Supreme Court due to the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. In conclusion, the Lavender Scare was a turning point in American history. It ignited decades of abuse and discriminatory and harassing behaviors towards members of the LGBTQ community. In response to those injustices, it demanded the creation of a platform and support system for homosexuals. As a result, homosexuals were allowed to more freely express themselves as a community and to fight for their rights. This was supported by organizations like the Mattachine Society, the creation of the One magazine, and the removal of homosexuality from the DSM. These prominent historical leaders and the events that they led proved the bravery and spirit that was used by American citizens.